In 1977, inside military planning rooms, one number keeps showing up on maps and reports: 50,000 tanks. That number isn't propaganda. It's a scenario. If it ever starts moving toward Western Europe, it doesn't become a normal battle. It becomes a time problem. How long until the front line breaks? How long until the roads choke? How long until reinforcements arrive? And that's why, when someone proposes an answer, the reaction is immediate. They laugh. Because the proposal isn't a modern fighter. It isn't a smart bomb. It isn't speed. It's a slow aircraft built to fly low, with a cannon. The A-10. The question is simple. How can a slow plane stop a tank advance? And that's what this video will show. It wasn't built to win the air. It was built to delay the ground, to break the tempo of an armored column, to repeat attacks again and again, and to turn that number, 50,000, from inevitable into expensive, slow, and vulnerable. And when that system was tested in the real world, nobody laughed anymore. In the late Cold War, NATO planners weren't obsessed with winning a perfect battle. They were obsessed with surviving a very ugly one. Because on paper, the numbers were brutal. Across Central Europe, especially along corridors like the Fulda Gap, the Warsaw Pact could mass armor faster than NATO could respond. Not a few brigades, whole formations. Enough steel to turn roads into rivers of tracked vehicles. And that's what made 50,000 tanks a real problem. It wasn't a flex. It was a timetable. NATO didn't have to defeat every tank. NATO had to slow the first wave long enough for the rest of the alliance to wake up. Because war in Europe wasn't measured in weeks. It was measured in hours. The first 48 to 72 hours were the entire story. How fast reserves could mobilize. How quickly reinforcements could cross bridges and choke points. How long supply lines could stay open. How long airfields could keep launching sorties. If that clock ran out, if the front collapsed early, then it wouldn't matter what NATO had on day 10. There might not be a day 10. And that's why the real question wasn't, what kills tanks? It was something more urgent. What kills time? They didn't even have to invent reasons to mock it. The A-10 gave them reasons for free. Because if you judged it like a normal aircraft, like a fighter, like a jet built to dominate a modern battlefield, it looked wrong in almost every way that mattered. And 3 jokes became 3 theories. Not just opinions, assumptions. Assumptions that shape training, assumptions that shape procurement, assumptions that harden into doctrine. Theory 1. Slow equals dead. Central Europe wasn't going to be a clean battlefield. It was going to be a cage. The sky would be stitched together by layered air defense. Up front, man-pads teams waiting for anything that dropped too low. Behind them, radar-guided anti-aircraft guns sweeping the horizon. Behind that, vehicle-mounted SAMs creating zones you simply couldn't enter. And the cruel detail is this. It wasn't one threat. It was overlap. You didn't escape one envelope and fly into safety. You exited one threat and immediately entered another. So the logic sounded airtight. A slow aircraft spends more time inside the envelope. More exposure means more tracking time. More tracking means more chances to get hit. And in real combat, you don't need many hits. You need one. If the A-10 goes low to use its gun, it enters the space where everyone shoots. If it enters, it gets hit. If it gets hit, it goes down. In that worldview, the A-10 isn't a weapon. It's a volunteer. Theory 2. Ugly equals obsolete. The A-10 didn't look like the future. No swept wings, no sleek profile, no speed you could brag about. It looked like a flying toolbox, straight wings, bulky fuselage, engines mounted high like an afterthought. And there's a quiet bias inside that judgment. In the supersonic age, shape became a proxy for competence. If it doesn't look fast, it won't survive. If it doesn't look modern, it won't work. And here's the part most people miss. Military institutions don't argue only with data. They argue with identity. The U.S. Air Force had spent decades defining itself as fast, high-tech, and decisive. An aircraft designed to be slow, stubborn, and hard to kill felt like an insult. Before you even get to Soviet analysts, you had American skeptics saying the same thing. Why are we building a plane that looks like it was designed to get shot? Theory 3. A gun plane is a fantasy, because a cannon isn't a missile. A missile lets you stand off, shoot from distance, stay outside the envelope. A cannon means you have to close the distance, and getting close to tanks isn't the hard part. Getting close to the air defenses protecting those tanks is. Everyone knew what a Warsaw-packed armored column would look like. Tanks in the center, infantry and carriers around them, and stitched into the formation. Guns, SAMs, MANPADs, a moving porcupine. So the conclusion sounded adult, responsible, almost impossible to argue with. Even if the A-10 can kill a tank, it can't survive long enough to matter. It can't stay long enough to slow the wave. And if it doesn't slow the wave, it's irrelevant to the 50,000 tank problem. And that connects back to the clock. Because what NATO needed wasn't a weapon that shines for 5 minutes. They needed something that could repeat the work, hour after hour, day after day. To buy the 48 to 72 hours that decide everything. That's why the laughter mattered. Because laughter becomes doctrine when it becomes an assumption. Too slow, too exposed, too close range, too old-looking. So they judge the A-10 as an aircraft, a bad aircraft, and that's where the mistake becomes fatal. Because the A-10 was never built to be a good aircraft. It wasn't built to win the air, it was built to be a solution to a different question, a question fighters were never designed to answer. Here's what they weren't measuring. They looked at the A-10 and saw a gun with wings, a stupid idea, a plane that has to fly low, fly slow, get close. So they asked the wrong question. How does it kill a tank? Because the A-10 was never built to win one dramatic moment. It was built to win a timeline. The A-10 isn't a cannon with wings, it's a delay system. And that system has 3 parts, simple, brutal, and easy to miss on paper. First, loiter. The A-10 was designed to stay in the area. Not for minutes, for hours. Fighters sprint. They pass through. They deliver one strike, and they're gone. The A-10 was built to orbit the problem, to hunt the column, watch it move, and wait for the moment it becomes vulnerable. Because a tank advance isn't one target. It's a chain of targets. Fuel trucks, bridges, bottlenecks, lead vehicles, air defenses, the recovery vehicles behind them. Loiter means you don't just hit a tank. You disrupt the whole rhythm. Second, survival. This is the part everyone mocked, until it mattered. The A-10 was built with the assumption that it will get hit. So the question wasn't, can it avoid fire? The question was, can it take fire and come back? Redundancy, separated systems, protected engines, a cockpit designed like armor, not like a sports car. Because the only thing worse than losing a plane is losing the plane and losing the pilot and losing the mission. If it comes home, it flies tomorrow. If it flies tomorrow, the column never gets a clean day. Third, repetition. This is the real weapon. The A-10 wasn't designed to do a single heroic pass. It was designed to run the same loop again and again. Find, strike, survive, repeat. 1 pass is damage, 10 passes is attrition, and attrition is what buys time. It forces columns to stop, to spread out, to hide, to move at night, to waste fuel, to call for air defense, to crawl instead of sprint. That's how you fight the 50,000 tank problem. Not by destroying 50,000 tanks, by making 50,000 tanks take too long to arrive. And that's the shift they missed. The weapon wasn't the burst. It was the loop. Truth 1. The gun is only half the story. Yes, the A-10 has the GAU-8. Yes, the ammunition is built for one ugly job, making armored vehicles regret existing. But the myth focuses on the noise, like the sound itself is the weapon. The truth is quieter, repeatable effect on the right targets. Because wars aren't won by a single perfect shot. They're won by outcomes you can reproduce under stress. A missile gives you a dramatic moment. A gun gives you a process. And the GAU-8 isn't just a big cannon. It's a way to turn a few seconds of exposure into a high-probability result. Not because it's magic, because the aircraft was built to place the gun where it can work. Angle, distance, time on station, second pass, third pass. That's why the gun is only half the story. The other half is how often you can use it. Truth 2. Delay the ground means attacking what keeps the column moving. People imagine the 50,000 tank problem like a video game. Find tank, kill tank, repeat. Real life doesn't work like that. A column is a living system. It moves because 1,000 small things keep moving. Fuel trucks, ammo trucks, repair and recovery vehicles, bridges and crossings, command vehicles and radios, air defense nodes that make the sky dangerous. So, anti-armor isn't just tanks. It's the pace setters and the lifelines. Hit the lead vehicles and the formation hesitates. Hit the recovery vehicles and wrecks become roadblocks. Hit the bridging equipment and rivers become walls. Hit the air defenses and suddenly everything else becomes exposed. And when those pieces get hit, something invisible happens. Rhythm breaks. Spacing collapses. Vehicles bunch up. Orders get confused. Routes choke. Everyone starts waiting for someone else to move first. It's not just damage. It's friction. And friction is how you buy time. Because every minute a column is stalled is a minute NATO gets closer to reinforcement, mobilization, and a stable line. Truth 3. Survival is the condition for repetition. This is the part people laughed at until it became the entire point. The A-10 was designed around a brutal assumption. You will be shot at. You will be hit. And you still need to come home. So survivability wasn't a nice bonus. It was the enabling condition. A protected cockpit. Redundant systems. Engines positioned to reduce vulnerability. Control backups designed for the worst day, not the best day. Because survivability isn't comfort, it's math. If the aircraft returns, it flies tomorrow. If it flies tomorrow, the enemy never gets a clean day. If the enemy never gets a clean day, the clock disappears. And that's what a delay system really means. Not one strike. A loop. Find, strike, survive, repeat. Again and again, until the enemy's schedule collapses. Curiosity reset. But to understand why the gun mattered at all, you need to see what it did to steel. This is the moment the jokes start dying. Because once you stop looking at the A-10 as an aircraft and start looking at it as a mechanism, the logic of the damage becomes terrifyingly clear. The GAU-8 isn't scary because it's big. It's scary because it creates a kind of impact density that most people's intuition can't process. When you see a tank destroyed, your brain expects one of two pictures: a single, clean penetration, or a catastrophic explosion. A missile, a shaped charge, one decisive hit. But the GAU-8 doesn't behave like that. It behaves like a machine that turns seconds into volume. A short burst isn't a few rounds. It's a tight cluster of high-energy impacts arriving so fast they blur into one event. And that's why the damage pattern looks wrong. Not one hole, not one crater, a shredded zone, a spray of punctures, a line of violence across the surface, a section of armor that looks peeled instead of pierced. To an analyst staring at grainy photos, it reads like physics breaking. Because to create that pattern, you'd expect multiple guns, multiple angles, multiple attackers. But it isn't multiple weapons. It's one weapon, built to do one thing repeatedly. And here's the part that matters for realism. The A-10 wasn't designed to one-shot the heaviest part of a tank frontally. That's not the story. The story is that tanks, no matter how tough, have weak geometry. Sides, rear, top surfaces, upper hull areas, engine decks, tracks, optics, external components. The A-10's job is to put itself in the right place, low, slow, close, so the gun can work on the weak parts. Not to punch a heroic hole through the strongest steel on the planet. To ruin what makes the vehicle fight, move, and see. Because even when a tank isn't instantly destroyed, you can still kill it as a weapon. Damage the mobility. Now it's a roadblock. Damage the optics. Now it's blind. Damage the engine deck. Now it's smoke and fire. Damage the tracks. Now the column slows and bunches. That's the real power of a weapon built for attrition. It doesn't need perfection. It needs repeatable, mission-shaped outcomes. A short burst, a target that can't dodge, a vulnerable angle, and a damage pattern that looks impossible only if you expected a missile. So no, this isn't invincibility, it's design. A gun, ammunition, and an aircraft built around one brutal requirement. Create consistent, repeatable anti-armor effects at the ranges and angles where armor is most human. And once you understand that, the next twist hits harder. Because on paper, it was designed for Europe. In reality, the verdict came somewhere else. This is the moment the jokes start dying. Because once you stop looking at the A-10 as an aircraft and start looking at it as a mechanism, the logic of the damage becomes terrifyingly clear. The GAU-8 isn't scary because it's big. It's scary because it creates a kind of impact density that most people's intuition can't process. When you see a tank destroyed, your brain expects one of two pictures: a single, clean penetration, or a catastrophic explosion. A missile, a shaped charge, one decisive hit. But the GAU-8 doesn't behave like that. It behaves like a machine that turns seconds into volume. A short burst isn't a few rounds. It's a tight cluster of high-energy impacts arriving so fast they blur into one event. And that's why the damage pattern looks wrong. Not one hole, not one crater, a shredded zone, a spray of punctures, a line of violence across the surface, a section of armor that looks peeled instead of pierced. To an analyst staring at grainy photos, it reads like physics breaking. Because to create that pattern, you'd expect multiple guns, multiple angles, multiple attackers. But it isn't multiple weapons. It's one weapon, built to do one thing repeatedly. And here's the part that matters for realism. The A-10 wasn't designed to one-shot the heaviest part of a tank frontally. That's not the story. The story is that tanks, no matter how tough, have weak geometry. Sides, rear, top surfaces, upper hull areas, engine decks, tracks, optics, external components. The A-10's job is to put itself in the right place, low, slow, close, so the gun can work on the weak parts. Not to punch a heroic hole through the strongest steel on the planet. To ruin what makes the vehicle fight, move, and see. Because even when a tank isn't instantly destroyed, you can still kill it as a weapon. Damage the mobility. Now it's a roadblock. Damage the optics. Now it's blind. Damage the engine deck. Now it's smoke and fire. Damage the tracks. Now the column slows and bunches. That's the real power of a weapon built for attrition. It doesn't need perfection. It needs repeatable, mission-shaped outcomes. A short burst, a target that can't dodge, a vulnerable angle, and a damage pattern that looks impossible only if you expected a missile. So no, this isn't invincibility, it's design. A gun, ammunition, and an aircraft built around one brutal requirement. Create consistent, repeatable anti-armor effects at the ranges and angles where armor is most human. And once you understand that, the next twist hits harder. Because on paper, it was designed for Europe. In reality, the verdict came somewhere else. On paper, the A-10 was built for Europe, for forests, rivers, choke points, and a war that would be decided in the first 72 hours. But history didn't give it that courtroom. It gave it a different one. Iraq, 1991. Because if you wanted to test an idea designed to stop the Soviet armored tide, you couldn't ask for a cleaner mirror than Saddam's army. Soviet equipment. Soviet training DNA. Soviet doctrine translated into Arabic. Large armored formations, dense air defenses, columns built to move fast, intimidate, and overwhelm. A system designed to look unstoppable on a map. And that's what made Desert Storm so important. It wasn't a duel. It wasn't a cinematic one-pass, one-kill fantasy. It was a campaign, day after day, sortie after sortie. The same loop, executed at scale. And this is where the A-10 stops being a meme and becomes a method. Because in a hostile environment, you don't measure weapons by how they perform on a perfect day. You measure them by how they perform when everything is trying to stop them. Dust, smoke, confusion, threat warnings screaming in the cockpit, tracers climbing toward you, missiles in the air, targets hiding, scattering, moving. And despite that, the A-10 kept doing what it was built to do. Find the ground problem. Put pressure on it. Come back. Do it again. That repetition is what mattered. Not a heroic moment, a steady erosion of an army's ability to move. Because every time an A-10 shows up, the enemy column has to pay a price. Spread out, slower. Hide, slower. Move at night, slower. Stop and wait for air defenses, slower. Detour around wrecks, slower. It turns movement into anxiety. And that's what scares an analyst. Not the spectacular kill. The consistency. A weapon you can't explain is unsettling. A weapon you can't model is worse. But a weapon that produces the same outcome again and again, even under imperfect conditions, that's the kind of thing that doesn't just destroy vehicles. It destroys schedules. It rewrites planning assumptions. It forces a doctrine to become defensive. So the point wasn't that the A-10 was unstoppable. The point was that the problem became expensive to move. Curiosity reset. And if movement becomes expensive, the next question is obvious. What did that cost do to the Soviet idea of war itself? Here's what the 50,000 tank problem really meant. It wasn't just 50,000 tanks. It was 50,000 engines that need fuel, 50,000 crews that need rest, 50,000 radios that need orders, 50,000 vehicles that need bridges, roads, and timing. Mass isn't just power. Mass is infrastructure. And infrastructure is expensive. Because once you build an army that large, you don't just buy tanks. You buy layers, air defense bubbles, escort vehicles, radar coverage, dispersal plans, decoys, repair and recovery teams, more fuel trucks, more spare parts, more everything. And that's the trap. A force built on mass assumes it can move like a wave. But the moment the sky becomes friction, the wave turns into a traffic jam. That's why the A-10 mattered, in a way that's easy to miss. It wasn't just a tank killer. It was an economic weapon. Because it forces the enemy to spend massively, not to win, but just to move. To protect each column, you need more guns pointed upward, more missiles, more crews trained to watch the sky, more vehicles that don't advance, only guard the vehicles that do. And every layer adds weight to the plan. More coordination, more delays, more failure points. So mass flips. What looked like inevitability becomes exposure. Because when the sky can punish movement, the bigger you are, the more you have to defend. And that's the lesson. The A-10 didn't defeat tanks by being better. It defeated doctrine by making movement cost time, and making time cost money. Mass becomes vulnerability when the sky becomes friction.